thanks for doing this. I really appreciate it. So I think I mentioned it. You are the first for the New Jersey, representatives to come on the podcast. So I'm pretty excited about this. So which is kind of
That is
cool.
very cool. No,
Yeah.
I'm honored.
Well, and what I try to do in this podcast is really, understand, a person's values in terms to the extent that they want to share them or talk about them. And then how does that relate to their business and how does that relate to what they do? And I think this wine industry and this agricultural aspect is really intriguing because a lot of times the owners or the people who are making the wine, have that direct correlation. So to see how that impacts what they do, I think is pretty fascinating. But yeah, I'm on my own, my soapbox when I say that stuff.
Yeah. No, I think you're absolutely onto something. And I was describing it to my wife, Jules, who's our winemaker, and she's absolutely brilliant at it too. Don't tell her I said so, but she is. But we talked about the fact that, a lot of us, when we get into a business like this one, which no one gets into to get rich, you come at it with a philosophy, right? And you come at it with certain goals that you're looking to achieve for yourself, for, the thing you're creating, and then for the people you're trying to share it with. And it's amazing how varied maybe some of those philosophies are. And which is why when we were talking earlier, I'm fascinated to see how you tie terroir with full, with value, and how that pulls itself together. Because I think that'd be an absolutely fascinating thing to study. And
Well,
certainly,
Scott, I'm calling it. I'm calling it. And maybe I should trademark it or something. And maybe in your previous life you could tell me how to do that. But I'm calling it Valroir. So if I
yeah,
mash those two together, I just think it's a really interesting concept. And if you really dig into the meaning of terroir, that's part of it's in there. But I'm making it more distinctive to highlight it more.
yeah, most definitely. And I think that's a forgotten part, honestly, because when typically you think of terroir, you're thinking of the soil, the weather, the climate, the things that are tangible that impact how the grapes are grown, that then impacts how the wine is made. But seriously, the philosophy of it, and the value component of, like you know your spiritual value, your intellectual value, I think has everything to do with that. And certainly it varies, you would imagine, from France to South Africa to Argentina. I would not be at all shocked to see the results of some of the, if you're going to call it research that you're doing, to see how it varies between, my part of New Jersey to another part of New Jersey to Virginia to New York. And like you, I visited a lot of those places, and I find a lot of commonalities, which is pretty exciting, particularly visiting in the mid-Atlantic, because I think a lot of us have a lot of the same values, weirdly, and maybe not weirdly. But then you compare that to what's going on in Napa Valley, and maybe our value system is a little closer to what Napa Valley was back in the 1960s. Maybe it's not quite so much what it is now. And so maybe, kind of like terroir, yeah, these days is kind of evolving in terms of, climate and weather. Maybe value, terroir, Valroir also, Valroir also changes a little bit, but I definitely think you're onto something there. I really do.
I appreciate that. Yeah, definitely over a glass of wine or two. I'm happy to sort of share some of that stuff. And I had this conversation with this guy Bob Polinsky, who's a master of wine in California, and I was telling him a little bit about this, and he says, you know what, similar. He's like, you might be finding some interesting things, and then I told him about some of the things that I was finding with the Finger Lakes, and he says, you know what, you may have and some distinctions regionally because they all have a different notion than say in Piemonte, right? In Italy, where it's like the different you can go to a different hill, 20
Right.
miles away and or 10, 10 minutes away or whatever it is, and you may have a different sort of flair. So I'm really, really curious to see what comes out of some of these discussions. And you're right, there may be something that might be slightly different from a northern New Jersey versus something southern. Never mind pork roll and Taylor ham. It could be
Or Eagles and Giants. Yeah.
as a unifier, right? There may be some uh, um, consistent or universal type of values, but there's my guess is, and I don't have any data to support this yet, there may be like, regional specialties, or I don't even know how to articulate it, some regional, idiosyncratic type of things that are happening that people in the region may not even realize themselves, right? So I do a lot of work with, senior executives and leaders, and a lot of times they don't know themselves some of the things that they're doing, right?
Yeah.
So it's nice to have that outside perspective, and I'm hoping that's some of the stuff that I find, but who knows? We'll see.
Well, and as you're saying that, I'm almost thinking too that you're going to find that the Valroir part of terroir may be able to, leap over region. So like to act a little more quantum physics as opposed to actual being next to it. You know what I mean? So because
Yeah,
a lot of us come to this a lot of different ways, right? So especially in New Jersey with, and we're all obviously a very close I guess I would call it a family because it's not quite being friends. So like we're family with all of the things that implies. But as you get to know the other um, people in the industry, a lot of us come to this either, having come up in a farming community in a farming family and are trying to do something to save the farm, and they may come to it with a certain perspective. And then you've got folks like me who came to it, and me and Jules who came to it from completely from the outside and had our own reasons for coming into to doing it. And maybe sort of our perspective and our philosophy might be potentially a little bit different. And even as I'm saying that out loud, you've even got people that have come from the outside from different industries than the one I was in that, again, have a completely different perspective given sort of the way they view business in general and the way they view our business and the way they then communicate that through the product that they're selling and the way that they're selling it. So there may be a lot of it may be a little less, you know, contingency, being contingent to one another, and it may be more sort of mycelium, kind of connecting underground where you don't necessarily, where you're going to find commonalities, but you're going to pop up in weird places.
well, it's funny, we just talked about vintage variation. There may be
Yeah.
values variation, right? So
Yeah.
you're right, there may be a different like value framework, because values come from, or how we were brought up, our different beliefs, and and everybody's got a different experience. So actually, I think that's even more of a sexy proposition to think about what happens in terms of some of this stuff I'm looking at.
Well, it's kind of fun to think about because the thing about terroir, and honestly, the thing that has been hardest to learn in the 21 years I've been doing this is that terroir is completely out of my control. And that's, being, a former lawyer and, being a former business person, you don't want things out of your control. That's a bad thing, right? And that's been the hardest thing to accept and to deal with is that all of this is going to happen. The soil is going to be the soil. You can do certain things to help add nutrients to it. You can do certain things to it, but it is what it is. The climate's going to be the climate. The weather's going to be the weather, and you can't do a darn thing to change it. Adding the Valroir piece to the terroir piece, it feels like you're imbuing the terroir thing with a little bit of consciousness, which I think is a really good thing. And a little, you're giving a little bit of power to the, to at least to the person in my industry, where suddenly your terroir is not just outside of your reach, but it's something that you can kind of help control and reflects you more than just the weather and the soil does. So no, I think this
Yeah.
is cool.
No,
I'm
well,
really,
the other thing that I keep thinking about, and again, this may sound, rainbows and unicorns, but my thesis is that everything that you do, Scott, everything that how you influence the field, is going to end up in that bottle. And it's not necessarily just Mother Nature and just wine technique. I think there's a lot more intention that goes into that, and I feel that that comes through in terms of what the product is. It comes through how it's presented. It's come through, all of that stuff I think makes
yeah.
in the bottle. And you're right. What's great is in this wine journey, because I'm also doing the WSET stuff, is that there's so much emphasis on like, what are you smelling? What are you getting out of the wine? What is that? But nobody ever talks about some of this other stuff, right? And even if you look on a lot of websites with wineries, they'll talk about all the structure and this, but there's not much else there. And in today's world, you know, they want to know where your meat's coming from. They want to
Yeah.
know all the nutritional details and everything else.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if we've given ourselves enough credit for all those other intangibles that I think finally make its way into the product. So that's another reason why I love doing this, because it gives an opportunity for those producers, and we know how tough this industry can be. You know, it gives them more opportunity to shine in terms of some
Yeah.
of the things they do. Right. So from that perspective, I really enjoy that aspect because I do this for my own selfish reasons, right?
Right.
I'm trying to understand, but I also think there's an opportunity for other people to shine too, which is, that's the whole thing.
Well, and I think that's a really interesting point because I mean, if there was ever a product that you could imbue with some level of soul, I would think wine would be that thing. Because it really, we talk about those of us that grow it and make it talk about it in very mystical terms amongst each other, not like, kind of blowing blowing smoke to the customer. I mean, we actually really do. It really does amaze us. And we do, like I honestly believe that the grapevines themselves are sentient the way that they react to things. And it's funny you mentioned too that that there's all so many things that go into making that bottle, other than just the physical things. I know you haven't been to our place yet, but our entire staff walks around with t-shirts on when they're serving and when they're doing everything. And they have been for the last 20 years that say across the chest, everything matters. And
In Walt Whitman penmanship,
in Walt
right?
Whitman's handwriting, yeah, being the former literature major that I was, so I totally geek out on that. But yeah, in Walt Whitman's handwriting, and I get asked all the time, it's like, what does that even mean? And the basic, and we do a wine we call Good Karma, and it is a light, dry, fruity red wine, and basically it kind of harkens back to that. Everything you do and you think, and your perspective on the world makes the world what it is, and which is an incredibly empowering thing because if that is true, then it is entirely within you to change the world that's around you. And that, by the way, was a philosophy that Walt had too. And so that absolutely sort of dovetails with what you're saying because everything that you do matters. The way that you make the wine, what you want the wine to say, and yeah, you're using grapes to say it, and you're using different types of yeasts to say it, and you're guiding the grape depending on the season you're having and the vintage you're having into becoming the wine that it becomes. But I think the intent that you're doing it with and the other things that you pour into it, I think that absolutely makes a difference. I think it really, really, really does. And I do appreciate your locavore perspective too, because I know for me that's absolutely true. Like I care where our tomatoes come from, and I care where food comes from, and what goes into it. And I really do think that is something that, we, the local wineries, wherever you locally are, I think that's one of the things we bring to the story, because one of the things we ask ourselves as winemakers is, does the world really need another bottle of wine, really? And sometimes you feel like the answer to that is, yeah. I mean, there's a kind of a glut of wine in the world, but there's not a glut of Auburn Road wine in the world or a glut of Mount Salem wine in the world. And it's not there, it's not telling, that separate story, whatever that story is. And if you're interested in that story, and if you're interested in tasting what a grape grown in, near you or, somewhere in your vicinity tastes like, or if you're not curious about what a taste or what a wine grown in Azerbaijan tastes like, or in China. We actually met some folks who are starting a winery in China, and
Oh, wow.
and have been corresponding with them, and hopefully want to go visit them. And I would love to see what a Cabernet Sauvignon or a Merlot tastes like grown in China. We were just here's something bizarre. We were just on the Isle of Jersey, right? Do you know where the Isle of Jersey is?
Is that like Ireland or something, or like?
Well, you're close. It's actually in the English Channel, and
Okay.
it's very close to France. It's about 14 miles off the coast of France, and we went there in July to visit the one winery on the Isle of Jersey. And it's a very long and convoluted tale how this all even happened. But we went and visited them, and they grew a couple of grapes that we recognized and that we also grew, and we brought some of our wine over and did a tasting together, and it was amazing. And the vineyard, you look out the back of the vineyard onto the English Channel, you could see the island of Guernsey, which is the next Channel island over.
Mm.
And it was just an extraordinary experience. And it's that kind of thing, I think, that makes the small producer and the local producer, even though, that's not my jersey, it's a different jersey. But to me, I mean, it's a small planet, right? So that fascinates me. And hopefully that's what kind of draws people to,
Well, see,
you know,
that's the spirit of, and I don't, I guess the spirit of connectiveness goes through that vehicle of wine, right? So that's, I think, the spirit of what happens in this world. Because you're right, another individual who writes for wine enthusiasts, and I had him in the podcast, Alex, when I was doing some research on peewees, and he was pretty controversial, very interesting cat. And he was like, "There's just too much." And this is a guy who like writes about wine, knows about. He's like, "There's too much wine in the world because we don't need this." He's like, "We just don't need it."
right.
And it was a cool perspective. And I want to qualify that by saying we don't need more mass produced wine. I think we need more local, regional, and people getting excited about that because they can, to your exact point, it's like a way to talk and connect to others, right? This is how the wine was made. This is where it was made right there. And this
Yeah.
is why it's sort of different than, you're going to find it, 2 hours from here. So I think that's really the really interesting thing. But yeah, so do we need more wine? I think we need more of the right type of wine.
Yeah,
Uh,
I would agree with that. And I think to that point, I mean, what makes wine special is its sense of place, right? Because there's really no other beverage
yeah,
like that has that sense of, at least not consistently. Like you could have a microbrewery that grows its own hops or something, but like this is us, like it is all about the sense of place. And sense of place includes,
back to
again,
terroir.
there you go. It includes the people growing it and living with it, and I'm surrounded by it where I'm sitting right now. And it's all of that is part of it.
Wow. So if I was to ask you, what would you, Sky, if I say to you, what are your core values? How would you respond to that?
Now, you would think that I'd have a really good answer to that question, knowing that this was coming. That's tough. And I was thinking about it earlier, and I don't know that I have like a good checklist of core values, except to say that the way that I got here was, as we discussed, I was a corporate lawyer, and my wife was a litigator, and we were living downtown in Philadelphia, and we were city people, and I was working 7 days a week, and we had just started having young kids, and it was one of those things where I wasn't getting to see her, I wasn't getting to see the kids, I was working like crazy, the whole panic attack routine, the whole bit. And it started going down, that bad path that, is fairly typical, unfortunately. And to our great credit, Jules and I sat down and said, okay, we need to make a change collectively together. And, that change probably involves not doing what we do for a living anymore. So we're like, all right, well, that's cool. All right, well, what else are we qualified to do? And we quickly realized we weren't qualified to do a darn thing other than being lawyers, which quickly became a very liberating realization, right? Because once you realize you're not qualified to do anything else, the whole wide world of things you're not qualified to do opens up to you. You just got to pick something.
Yeah.
So we happen to be drinking a bottle of wine. We're like, what does it take to do that? And we're like, I don't know, let's figure it out. And little by little, I started writing a business plan, which I still have, which is very comical. It's got the basic business stuff, and then it's got a big gap. It says, learn how to make wine. And Jules started studying the winemaking
Section
process.
3, to be determined. How to make wine.
Right, big, big, big section, and learn how to sell it. And but Jules started studying the winemaking process, and we started looking for property, and then bought this place without ever having made a drinkable bottle of wine, without ever having plowed a field. And this story, I guess, as I thought about it, kind of brought me around to the core value piece, which is we are doing this, and we left, of course, both of us left jobs that paid us a lot more money than we're doing paying now or getting paid
Right.
now. And I think the value was each other ultimately and wanting to do something together and do something creative together and to be there for each other and to I guess to quote I think it's Thoreau, right? To live deliberately. You know what I mean? Not have life happen to you.
Yep. Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
and to take and to take you know the time that we have together and we have on this earth and do something with it that we feel like is expressive and worthwhile. And I mean, it could have been honestly starting a hole digging business, assuming so long as we did it together. You know what I mean? And it just so happened that we fell into this, and it turns out that it's absolutely the ideal place for us, honestly, because she's extremely detail oriented and very meticulous. And I'm a much sort of, and I was a general counsel when I was a lawyer, so I have a much broader, sort of. I'm not an
Perspective.
expert at anything, but I'm pretty good at knitting things together. And this is the world's most complicated small business. I mean, it is, again, it's not going to make you rich, but it doesn't get any more complicated than this in terms of you have the agricultural piece, you have the manufacturing piece in making wine, you have the hospitality piece in our case, you have the distribution piece. You're doing it on literally a global scale, right? Because we're a much, as opposed to being a restaurant or being, like a little store in a little town, people come to us from all over the place, and people are interested in us and will find us because of who and what we are and what we do. That is to say, the industry we're in. So I guess that's a very long-winded way to say that you know the values we come to this with are wanting to be sensitive to having a quality of life and living life seriously and deliberately, understanding that you don't have a lot of it, right? And then the thing that the wine business allows us to do is to then share that sort of sentiment and that ethos and that opportunity with maybe folks who aren't completely and utterly bananas and will quit their day jobs and do what we did, but want to have an experience, even for a short period of time, that gives them a little bit of that. And you can
Yeah.
call it escapism if you want to, but maybe what it does is it, gives them a place to take a breather and to, maybe live life, quote unquote, whatever that means for you, you know, in a place that allows you to imagine what that feels like and to make maybe you leave here and this is my hope is that you go off and into your daily life and you take a little bit of whatever it was you found here with you.
So,
Um,
well, let me ask you this: what do you hope people leave with when they come to your place? What do you hope that they leave with?
Aside from more bottles of wine, you mean?
Yeah, well, that's a
Yeah.
given, right? That's a given.
Right. No, I hope they go away feeling lighter. Because it's especially these days. I mean, it's a heavy place to be, this planet and this country specifically. And I hope they go away feeling like you do after a really great meal or after you've spent time with a really good friend and where you're the real world is still there, the things you worry about are still there, but you come away from it feeling a little less heavy about it, you know what I mean? And maybe you leave with a little smile on your face, like, you know what, hey, everything's all good. That's ideally what I would want people to leave with, which is why it absolutely crushes me when I get, and it happens to everybody, but you get, reviews from guests that come through, and I respond to all of them, by the way, and which is actually the only thing that I'm actually good at, is responding to reviews. Being a literature major and a former attorney, it is really my art form is responding to those. And just a quick aside, I mean, when I respond to them, I respond to them sincerely. Like if we screwed up, I'm more than happy to say, yeah, that's ridiculous. We didn't do well there. And I apologize for that. And if of course the lion's share of them, almost all of them, are glowing and ecstatic, and I'm so excited to read those. But then there's the ones that really hurt me where, they're like, I showed up here because I'd heard great things and I was really having a lousy day. And, this happened and that happened. And they'll share some of that in the review even. And then they'll be like, and I got there and, maybe the service wasn't what I would have wanted, or I had to wait too long for this, or, the pizza was burned and it made me sad. And then they left and they felt worse when they left than when they got there. And those absolutely got me. And if anything motivates me, I mean, a lot of things motivate us these days, but that's certainly when it comes to the hospitality piece of what we do. Like, I never want that to happen again. And of course it's going to, because you can't be perfect, but like that absolutely kills me when that kind of stuff happens.
Well,
Because that's
knowing that you can't be perfect, why do you think that you said you used the term guts me? Why do you
yeah.
think it guts you so much?
Because well, it's funny because we do talk a lot here. In fact, I just came from a 3-hour meeting with our managers and Jules, and we talk about the difference between good and great. You know what I mean? And if we're going to do something, and if we were going to do this, we didn't want to just be good at it or just get by with it. We wanted to be great at it, and if the question is why, I don't know why. I know because I figure if you're gonna do something, you might as well be great at it. And if in fact, and this goes back to your Valroir question, if in fact the big piece of our Valroir is that the wine is excellent, and I think it is, and if the food, and we make wood fire pizza and stuff, and if that is really good, if not close to excellent, and I think it is, you want the experience, the hospitality experience, which is the way we've chosen to communicate it. Again, to give people the chance to sit down at a table and be taken care of for a change. Because generally speaking, you're not right in the world. So to have somebody come and just say, you know what, whatever you need, whatever you want, within reasonable limits, I'm here to get for you. And when we don't come through on that promise, that feels like we're being, and if it's one time out of 100, yeah, that's pretty darn good, right? That's a great percentage, but that's not great. And you've let somebody down on top of that, and that I think probably is the part that bothers me most of all, is that they came here looking for something because it's something that either I promised them or I delivered to somebody else, and they wanted to come here and experience. And I blew it up somehow. And we had one, and one that I still think about all the time is we had a guest come, and she was African American, and she had an experience that objectively, and looking at it objectively, um, most of us would be like, yeah, that was no big deal. So they just didn't see your table, and 10 minutes went by, and whatever the case may be. And that this guest went and complained to one of our hosts, and the host might have been busy with something, certainly didn't handle it as well as they could have, but felt like this person felt completely brushed off. And then somebody walked in who was an African American, and our host jumped up and took care of whatever they needed. Needless to say, they felt discriminated against in a very real and visceral way. And they wrote a review, and they were really, you could tell they were really upset by it. And so I emailed them back and I said, look, here's my cell phone number, here's my email address, call me. And I talked to her, and she really was upset. And I apologized, and I said to her, I'm like, and I wasn't necessarily defending our staff necessarily, but I said, I know these people that served you. I know exactly who they were, and I know them as people, and I know for an absolute fact that there was no malintent, that they are not those kind of people that if they knew we were having this conversation, they would be traumatized by the fact that they made you feel this way. And I said, so and I said, but that's not to diminish the fact that, you had the experience you had and you come to it from the perspective you come to it from. And that makes it extremely legitimate. And there's nothing that will delegitimize the fact that you had that experience. And
Right.
I said, I would love to have you come back and, bring your husband, bring your friend, bring whoever, and let me show you around and let me, let us make this up to you. And she's like, well, let me talk to my husband and we'll think about it. And she called me back and said, thanks, but I don't think I can. And I understood, but I've still got that with me. You know what I mean? And it still really, really makes me upset that, that not only did we not, and I think it might have been an occasion too, like it was like her birthday or something. And not only did we not make that a special thing, but we at that small moment for, whatever confluence of reasons were part of the problem, and not part of her solution. And that's, and again, like I said, I mean, once once you set this thing up as to be what it is, um, you've got to want to go all the way with it. You know what I mean? You've got to want to be sincere about it and serious about it and take it seriously. Because if I was to just brush that off with a response and say, I'm really sorry I had that experience, here's a $10 gift certificate.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, that's being insincere, and that's not being true, I think, to, again, back to your Valroir. I mean, that's not being true to our Val. You can't walk around with everything matters on your shirt and not take that seriously.
Thank you for sharing that. That's pretty incredible. And you know, there's a lot of credit I think that goes out to that woman for actually calling you back to
Yeah.
sort of give you that feedback. So that's pretty incredible from her perspective. So that's pretty wild. But the interesting thing about like values and because and by the way, thank you for being honest about saying, listen, I don't have like a list and all that. That's actually quite cool because if everybody has like a list, they start spouting stuff. I get really sort of
Right.
I mean,
I made several and tore them all up, just so you know. Yeah.
well, it's funny in the work that I do when usually the first pass through when people go through this go through this with me, that's not what they ultimately end up with, right? Because you have to get through a lot of other stuff, but that's a whole other conversation.
Right, right.
But what I was gonna say was is that a lot of times when you go through conflict, and you talked about how you guys got to even still doing the winery, and then this sort of experience, a lot of times those experiences will highlight and flag what those values are and what those feelings are.
Mhm.
So I'm curious if you reflect on it and I come down there and when we have a glass, um, if there's any reflection that you came through because that's very 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 powerful stuff and I think sometimes people don't take the time to really understand that but that's me on
No, I,
my
I think you're dead on because I mean it's things like that. I mean, and you're right. Those two stories are good examples of it where you have choices to make, right? Like what are you? Who are you? What do you stand for as a human person? What do you stand for as a company? And I've never been one of those people. And you and I both came from the corporate world, like where it's not personal, it's business, and I'm like that has never been anything that I
I
took
always
seriously.
struggle with that stupid line
Yeah.
because I should say stupid line. I always struggle with that because to me everything is personal.
Yeah, of course it is.
There's always feeling, no, you can't take it personally. Well, no, I do. You
Yeah.
do. I don't know how you bifurcate that. So
Yeah. Yeah. No, I
maybe
completely agree.
maybe that's just sort of the life we lead. So I have always been sort of in that service type mind frame. So for me, as you're talking about that, I don't want to say I understand because you never truly understand, right? But I can see some of the things that I have experienced as well in terms of it's that one thing that just sort of nudge you. You can have 1,000 great great sort of responses, and it's that one. It's like I used to do a little bit of stand-up comedy in the day, and it's like you get everybody laughing, and it's the one person who just sits there like this.
It's like I
You know?
gotta get that guy.
Yeah, yeah. It's like
Yeah. And that's the guy you think about. It's like what? Yeah.
yes, yes.
Yeah.
So it's I guess that has been a flaw of mine through my life though. But it was funny because as you were talking, I was just sort of nodding, jotting down a couple things, and what came up for me as you're talking was like creativity.
Mhm.
and then care was a big one that sort of, um, eh, when you talk, you can hear that.
Oh, well, hope so. Hopefully, I mean, and we the other thing that we constantly say to ourselves, and I think it's even on our like the first thing you see on our website is everything we do here is art, is the way we think about it,
Yeah, yeah.
and it is. I mean, agriculture is absolutely an art, and now that we've been farmers for only 21 years, and quick aside, by the way, have you ever heard of Cowtown Rodeo?
No.
Okay, it is the longest running weekly rodeo in the entire country, and it's right a mile from us, like right out my window here.
Really?
Yeah, in southern New Jersey. Yeah, and it's 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 a cultural experience, I have to tell you. It's all summer long, and it's something you
What's
have
the
to
name of it
experience.
again?
Cowtown Rodeo.
Cowtown Rodeo. Okay.
Yeah, Cowtown Rodeo. And and they have been here literally for hundreds of years. The folks, the family that runs it. And in fact, they were cowboys before there were even cowboys. And they would their family, and this is a great, even aside from an aside, but their family, his great grandfather was with Matt Anthony Wayne when they drove cows from down here in Salem County up to Valley Forge to save Washington's troops in Valley Forge. And they were cowboys here in 17, whatever that was, 78, 79. So they've been doing this. I mean, they were cowboys before there was such a thing, right? But anyway, so they've been in
Wow.
this community for a really, really long time. And Jules and I showed up here as city lawyers who are going to start a winery. So we're gonna come in, we're gonna farm, we're going to make alcohol, and we're from the city coming into a community that has been a community for I don't know hundreds and hundreds of years with generally the same families. And we're surrounded by horses and cows and fields and things. And that takes a lot of balls basically to drop yourself into the to a middle of a community like that. And last year was our 20th anniversary, and they have been great friends to us over the years, the folks at Cowtown and a lot of the other farmers in the community too. But 20 years ago, they showed up, or not 20 years, last year, we were our 20th anniversary. They um, uh, Grant Harris and his wife Betsy and the artist that does our artwork, Carolyn Mortimer, and her husband showed up with a cake to welcome us to the neighborhood 20 years later, right? Because it was
You're probably here to stay now, right?
yeah,
That's
right. And they're like, you know what? You've earned your stripes. You've earned our respect, basically. And I got to be honest with you, there is nothing that I think I could probably do going forward that I'll ever be prouder of than that. That we showed up not knowing absolutely nothing from nothing, and we're able to, we're able to, you know, become farmers that are legitimate and that are taken seriously by other farmers. You know what I mean? That's pretty darn cool, honestly.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. It's a nice badge to have.
Yeah, it really was. Although that's a complete non sequitur that I now lost what the original point was supposed to
No,
be.
no, no, that's okay. That actually that's actually brings up something else for me that I'm curious about when you talked about it. You've been in the area for 20 years as a
Yeah.
farmer,
Hmm.
right? So over that 20 years, if I was going to ask you, what are three words and only three words that you would use to describe the area or that
Ooh,
little region of your world? What
ooh,
would those three words be?
okay. Three words. Um, that's a really, really, really good question. Um, I would say, wow, that's a really good question. And are you talking like the terroir of it, or just generally speaking, just the whole vibe?
However you would like to interpret that question, counselor, counselor.
Right. Yeah. All right. That's fair. That's fair. All right. So, yeah, three words. I would say that it is, well, small town is one word, is two words. It is, um, wow. Well, country would be one, um, in pretty much every sense of that word. Um, it would be all right. I'm gonna do this if you don't mind. Is and I remember this from law school when the professor would ask a question and then you would give a different answer and then the professor would come back and say, "Okay, that's fine, but you're not answering the question that I asked you." The thing that's interesting about this part of the world, though, is there really is no good way to like give it like single word description. And what I mean by that is one of the words I was going to say is welcoming. But at the same time, it's really not because we got here and I remember going to the little general store in Woodstown, which is the town near us, and coming in and and making small talk and saying, "Hey, this, we just moved into the neighborhood. We're starting a winery. This is, really great. I didn't even know this existed down here." And the guy looked at me straight in the eye and said, and he wasn't kidding. He's like, "Don't tell anybody." Right? Because they didn't want the outside in. You know what I mean? They didn't want people to show up. So it is welcoming, but at the same time, there's a real insularness. I don't know if there's a what noun version of that is.
Maybe
Um,
protective?
Protect, maybe, yeah. Like when you cross the border from Gloucester County into Salem County, which is the county we're in, like Gloucester County is all built up and and it's got a lot of development going on. You cross into Salem County, nothing. Like it's like Woodstown, New Jersey, like is the little town that we're right next to. And we're in one of those places in the world where you can say, yeah, we're going to town. You know what I mean? Because we're outside of it. And they still have a Fourth of July parade with the kids putting baseball cards in their spokes, and every fire truck in the region coming down, and the marching band from the local high school. Like it's like nothing you've ever seen before. The Salem County Fair, which is I can walk through a cornfield and get to it there, isn't a fair with like rides and like those kind of things. It's piglet racing, it's tractor pulling, it's 4-H all over the place, it's skillet throwing. So like apparently like women used to throw skillets at their husbands, so they have a skillet throwing competition. Like it's and we showed up here coming from the city, and we are literally 40 minutes from my house in Queen Village, where we lived, to here. And we were like, we went, the realtor who sold us the house took us to the Salem County Fair. And we were like, what planet are we on? And then to the Cowtown Rodeo, what planet are we really on? And then the Fourth of July parade. I mean, it's like you almost, it's not like you've gone back in time, but it is the small town Americana in, the sort of the traditional sense of that word. Although interestingly, because we've done a lot of work with the Cowtown guys recently, where the guy that runs the rodeo, a guy named Grant Harris, amazing guy, brilliant guy. Although he's always got to dressed as a cowboy basically, and speaks with a little bit of a draw. He might be one of the smartest guys I've ever met, honestly. And he came up with this. He basically built this wagon, and it's a big red wagon, says Cowtown Tours on the side, and it's being pulled by a brand new little John Deere tractor. And he pulled it up to my building and he said, let's do something with this. And I'm like, yeah, let's do something with this. So, so we teamed up with the Cowboy Outfitters, which is up right on the other, right near where the rodeo is, which is right through the cornfield and the cow pastures and all that stuff. And so we rigged up a tour that starts here at Auburn Road, and we pour you a glass of wine, and you get on the wagon. And Grant's driving the thing, and he drives through our vineyard, and so you see the vineyard, and you see Auburn Road Vineyards, which we kind of model after a European style wine bar kind of thing. So it's very continental in a sense. And you drive through a cornfield or a soy field, and then you get to his pasture, and you drive through the bulls and the horses and this big, huge, wide open field, which when you're a city guy like I am, is bloody terrifying because it's like being in the middle of an ocean, right? There's like way too much space around you, but it's also exhilarating. And you drive through that, and then you get to in about a half an hour of going 4 miles an hour, you get to the where the Cowboy Outfitters is, and there's going to be a brewery there. And we let you out, and you go and buy a cowboy hat, and you're going to be able to go and taste a little beer, and then you get back on the wagon and come back down. And it's, I mean, it's brilliant because when we think, and this kind of goes back to what we were saying earlier, when you look at yourself as a business that is marketing and is communicating and emoting to the world writ large, not to the people around me, which is good because there's no people really down here. But when you're communicating outwards to, Europe and Asia and Africa and any place else, um, the ability to come down here to Auburn Road Vineyards and, as European style as we may think we are, but to come down and have what is truly, by the way, an Americana experience, because, Grant's family has been here for hundreds and hundreds of years. Between Jules and me, I think of our, what would it be, eight grandparents, only one of them is not an immigrant. The rest of them are
Okay.
all immigrants. So, and what we're doing here is every bit as Americana as what they're doing there. And you get to experience all of it in this little wagon tour that we do. And so all of a sudden, we're turning, what is, okay, maybe welcoming slash unwelcoming, maybe, whatever, Salem County, into a place where you're going to experience, maybe like it's like a pure distillation of what kind of America is really kind of all about. And
Mhm.
you're marketing that, and I am, to Italy, for example. And by the way, it helps that in Italy, there's nothing cooler than a cowboy. So like the fact that
Yeah.
and we are, by the way, selling wine. We've just exported wine to Italy. Where Jules and I are going over there in November to do a bunch of tasting events, all up and down the boot of Italy with New Jersey wine, us and Bellevue Winery in Landisville. And already there are two restaurants in Milan that are carrying Auburn Road wine.
That's
And,
amazing. That might be a topic for us to discuss on another time, because I'm very curious to hear about that.
oh,
So
dude,
I'll give you one antidote, and then I'll give you the professor treatment.
go
So
ahead.
my wife's my wife's cousin, he builds like handmade canoes, and
Yeah.
he's done that for like there's Olympic people that have bought stuff for him and stuff like that. And he's up in, I want to say, New Hampshire. But when we talk to him individually, like he's like, it's so beautiful, it's amazing, it's the most spectacular landscape you can have. And he talks about all this stuff. And then he does exactly what you had articulated earlier. He's like, don't tell anybody. Right. He goes, usually when people ask me about it, I tell them, oh, there's too many bugs, it's all
Right.
mud roads. You don't want to come up here. You just don't want to come up here.
I get
But
it. I do get it. I totally understand.
so now here's the professor treatment. Now that
Okay.
we talked about that,
All right.
let's go back to the original question.
Okay.
So
All
we
right.
three, I have like country slash Americana. I get that.
All right. So country Americana. Um, Sunset.
Oh, that's good.
Um, and um, golly,
What do you think about when you wake up in the morning there?
what do I think about when I wake up in the morning there? That's gosh, that's another great question. It is peaceful.
Peaceful.
It is. And it's yeah, I mean and although peaceful feels like kind of a cop out word. As, as
There's
I'm
no
sitting
such
here
thing as a cop out word. You know
staring at
that.
leaves of
You know
grass
that.
sitting on my
Oh, see,
yeah,
there
I
you
mean, I
go. Yeah.
guess
Walt Whitman would not say that there's cop out words, right?
that's
That's not.
true. He would that's true. He would absolutely, although he wouldn't be limited to three. He would take that three and he'd stretch them out into like 15 pages of free verse. But yeah, no, I think Americana's a good one. I think Sunset's a good one. Um, and um, and I think I would add kind to that.
Oh, that's
Um,
good.
because of all the we've met all kinds of people here, and some have been fans of ours and some haven't. But by and large, everybody we've met here has been extremely kind, and that's a pretty rare thing these days too.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
even if they had some fun at our expense, as I know the rodeo guys did when they saw us get here and have admitted as much, watching us fumble along. Um, here's a great example. So we had a snowstorm and we didn't have a plow and we had this big road. And so we got our cultivator and we stuck a board in it that acted like, and so we dragged that behind a tractor. And I didn't see anybody watching us, and I didn't know that anybody saw us. But the next week, don't you know, there was a drag behind plow left on our farm here by the rodeo guys. And they just left it for it. They didn't say anything, didn't tell me they were leaving it. They just left it there. And that's pretty cool.
That is cool. It seems like they had a sense of humor, a sense of sort of, humanity, right? So
Most definitely.
that's
Yeah.
interesting. So I'm going to throw another curveball at you.
Okay.
I appreciate it. If you would let me know, like, who are some of the heroes that you've had in your life, or people that have inspired you?
Heroes
I
that I've
imagine
had.
there's one that I can think about who's got the book right there, but I don't know. But
Yeah.
who would be those heroes in your life?
Yeah. Walt's kind of more of a patron saint than a hero because,
Okay,
like hero is
that's fair.
something kind of you aspire to be, right? And you know, I don't think anybody aspires necessarily to be Walt Whitman, but I do love his perspective on things most of the time. Heroes, that's tough. Golly. So I would say that, and this is going to sound bizarre, but to the extent that I've ever been asked this question, this is always what pops into my head, is Bugs Bunny has always been a big hero of mine. Because, he's a very kind of American kind of character, right? And he's a good guy and he always means well and he's patient to a point. But once you've kind of pushed him over the edge, then all bets are off. You know what I mean? And he's creative and but he's also compassionate. You know what I mean? He'll blow up Elmer Fudd a bunch of times, or that poor opera singer. Like after a while, what he does to that poor opera singer. But and he gives him several chances. I mean, the opera singer comes up and he breaks his ukulele and he thinks, oh, he's a music hater, and then whatever else, and then he's and then after a while he's like, all right, I got to teach this cat a lesson. So I've always kind of liked, kind of the light way that he sort of takes the world to, you know what I mean? He doesn't take anything too terribly seriously, you know?
Yep.
So I think that's got to be one. I was just talking to our crew about this, our staff last night, and then our staff again today. Another one has got to be, and this is from a purely business point of view, is definitely Walt Disney. Like I just think, when you go down to Disney World, and you can love it or hate it, for all of the things that are good and bad about it. But man, you can't deny that like everything they do down there is meticulous. And there's no chip of paint that's not painted over. All the flowers are alive. The cast members is what they call the folks that work there. They are all they are all they're well trained. They know what they're doing. They're sensitive to the guest needs. All of the things that you want your your staff to be, and you want your presentation to be. And it's hard work, man. It is really hard work, and you see what goes into it to do that. So I would say from a purely sort of business presentation point of view, I would say him. And it's not lost on me that both of those have animation involved in them. So I'm not sure why. I'm
Oh,
not remotely creative, but
oh, that's
at least not in
interesting.
that way. And then role models. Golly. Um, Weirdly, in the latter part of my life, actually, and this is going to sound either bizarre or either pandering. But I would say I have two sons, and as they've gotten older, I've learned an awful lot from the way I've seen them negotiate the world, and kind of seen how, and I mean I'm sure they've learned a thing or two from me and Jules, but just watching how the both of them, and they're both they have very similar cores, you would say values, but they have very different approaches to them, and but watching how they like I'm generally a very at least out in public a very generally shy person, right? I'm not good at small talk at all. and I'm not generally, very outgoing, with the exception of course, playing the role of the guy that runs Auburn Road Vineyards. Because when I'm down there, you're putting on a character
Yep.
basically. And so that I've mastered over 20 years. But generally speaking, I'm not. But even that character, I've borrowed a lot of that from Jake and Luca, my sons, and and watching how good they are with people, and and how they navigate the world. And the world is much different now in the 20 years that and one's 25 and and one's 22. um and when I'm just turned 58, so the world, when we were in the 80s, and the kind of the way you could do things and say things and react to things is very different than it is today. And I've learned an awful lot about how to be a good, respectful, conscious um, person in 2025 and 2024 and 2023 from them. Probably more from them than I've learned from anybody. Um, and so and it's and I yeah, I mean, I think that's certainly in the later years of this has been they've been somebody I've learned a lot from.
That's very cool. Thank you for sharing that. If
Yeah.
what would be one or two key takeaways that you would want somebody that's listening to this conversation? What would you want them to walk away from our discussion?
Oh golly. Well, one of the things that people say to me, because they, usually they're really kind of, wow, that's a really cool story. You guys quit your day job and you started this without, knowing what the hell you were doing. That's, whatever. I'd love to do that. And, part of the message is, well, you can do that. Anybody can do that. You did that. You know what I mean? Which is something I thought was super awesome. And I want to hear more about that over a glass of wine too, by the way.
Absolutely.
Because I mean, as bananas as this was, you mad about bananas me a little bit. Like I was telling you, like acting school, like, all right, starting a farm, at least, I've got a thing that if it goes shitty, I can sell it. You know what I
Yeah, you
mean?
got
But
an asset there.
I got an asset, right? Acting school, that's pretty awesome, by the way. And like I said, I do want to hear more about that. But the message, I'm sure you get this question all the time too, is, I want, maybe on some level, this person says, I want to do that. And usually what I say to them is like, yeah, you can do that. There's just a couple of things you've got to do. One is you've got to be willing to work your ass off. And most people, that's generally true because most people work hard at whatever it is they're doing.
Yeah.
But the other thing is you have to, and I guess this comes back full circle to the value question, is you got to want the right things. So if you're looking for the house at the shore and the nice car and you're looking to sock away a whole boatload of money, you're not going to be able to do that and change your life the way that you and I have done it. You got to be willing to to be happy with the thing that you've chosen as the thing that that makes you happy. And that and this is only about a year and a half ago. Somebody gave me this quote, which is one of my favorites. I'm going to make Auburn Road t-shirts made with this quote on it that says, "Find what you love and let it kill you," which is Charles Bukowski,
Yeah.
the
Okay.
poet.
Yeah.
And I just and the broader poem is even better. But I I heard that phrase, and it's one of those things. That's one of the things I love about poetry, especially good poetry, is that the minute you hear it, you're like, that is truth. You know what I mean? That find what you love and let it kill you, whatever that thing is. And weirdly, like a week after I heard it, Jules was reading a magazine, and Sean Penn, the actor, was being criticized by a journalist because he smokes all the time. And he actually used that same quote, saying, "You know what? Find what you love and let it kill you." But so that's probably one of the things I would want people to take away is that, yeah, I mean, like, life is short, brother. And if you want to, however you want to live it, if you feel like the way you're living it right now isn't that thing, then, it's within you to change it. You just, there's certain prices you have to pay for that, and you got to be willing to do it.
That is true.
Yeah.
Scott, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to do this. This has been incredible, and thank you very much for kicking us off in New Jersey. I really appreciate it, and I have a funny feeling we're going to have some more conversations.
I'm very excited for that, and I'm glad you found New Jersey, so to speak, and I'm excited to introduce you to the rest of the crew and some of the other wineries and get their perspective because I'm sure it's going to be I'm sure it's going to be interesting to hear, and I'm excited to hear it.
Thank you, sir.
All right, thank you.